Don't hold back.
By the way, Don and me were watching. You all saw the John Ankerberg debate. We saw the other debate. I don't know if you saw it on YouTube, but Flew was so funny. He had his face like this to the audience, like it was so bad. And at one point, remember, he went like that, and he goes, "Well, Flew, what do you think?" And he goes, "I said, did you put it on pause?" he just froze for like 5 seconds. And goes, "Oh, me?" And the moderator, wasn't the moderator trying to help him out?
Exactly.
Like
He was trying to spoon feed him, and he was just like,
Habermas said that he has progressively began to question his own internally. Now, the other thing I didn't know about Flew, and I think it's in the second debate we're about to play, second interview I'm about to play, second part, is that I had not seen this already, but Habermas said that Flew went back and forth on this for a while, months. I'm a theist, no, I'm not a theist, come back, I'm not a theist, and that was interesting about how he was obviously wrestling with it.
very
And
conflicted.
very conflicted. So I didn't know that part of the story until Gary told me. So and also, how many of you remember that we had the interview since Bart Ehrman wasn't available? Tim McGrew interviewed for us.
Yes.
He is going to be in March in Fort Worth at the Apologetics Conference at Southwestern Seminary, and he loved this whole idea of the book club so much that when he found out he was going to be there, he called me back and said, "Is there any way I could meet the book club?" And he said, "I'll fly in a day early or stay a day late or something like that." So we have him penciled in to be with us on a special Friday, the 23rd of March. So I don't know if we just want to push our date forward like that, or if we want to try to have 2 meetings that month. We can decide that later. He's already filmed when I had him in New Orleans, I went ahead and did a commercial with him about it. So what he wants to do is talk a little bit more about Bart Ehrman for maybe 20 minutes, the thing he didn't have time to do in our debate. And then open mic, he said, "Stump the Chump." This is Stump the Chump. So he would love to hear any questions you might have. Do you guys like that idea to have Tim McGrew in your live with us?
Sure. Yeah.
So,
if nothing else, he's just a lot of fun.
yeah, we've never done that before with the live. We did have Aaron Ra in, and that was a trip for the Christians, I think, a little bit, you know. So he is quite a colorful character. How many of you were here for the Aaron Ra? Yeah, you remember what I'm talking about.
He was somewhat behaved.
Oh yeah, I mean he was nice, but he kind of lapsed into some of his talking point. I remember he said something about, you know, the something along the lines of the Christians with their the crazy Christians with their position on this. I said, Aaron, you mean those other Christians, not us, right?
I mean it.
Yeah, but anyway,
There's some truth to that.
yeah. I know. I mean, hey, we earn that sometimes. Some of those complaints.
James, excuse me, but that apologetics event you're referring to, who do you have to be to get into that?
It's open to the public, and in fact, last year when they had it there, that's when they had the debate with John Mark Reynolds and Shermer, and Michael Shermer. And what I did is I comped maybe about 12 or 14 atheists from Metroplex Atheists. I'll pay your way if you go. It wasn't that expensive. So, but there's no debate this time. If there's a debate, I would even say maybe do we want to go get a group together to go watch the debate. I'm assuming that any of you might be interested in hearing the Apologetics Conference. I think it's going to be Friday. Well, no, it can't be Friday because he'll be here. So I think it's going to be Saturday, all day Saturday. I think is what it's going to be.
So how would we find the?
It would be SW. BTS, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary.edu, and just search for apologetics, and it'll give you the date.
It should be one of the main pictures
I
on the
will
scroll.
definitely try to go to that. That's
So
cool.
I think it's going to be Nancy Piercy is one of the other speakers, I believe, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
Yeah.
Also,
March. Tell them about the other thing.
well, March 2nd and 3rd is Greg Kokel, J. Warner Wallace, John Stone Street, etc., etc. Apologetics Student Conference at Cottonwood. But I was going to mention that Tim, if anybody's interested and willing to drive to Allen on that Sunday that he's here, he's going to spend most of that day at Cottonwood.
Okay.
Oh wow.
Long drive, but worth the drive.
Several events. On a Sunday it's easy. On Friday night it's not.
Yeah. In fact, just talking off the top of my head, and Bill, we can confer on this or not, but if that apologetics conference is going to be the same time as our book club, maybe we should just move the whole book club to that third Friday for March.
Yeah, whatever.
Um,
Or we could have a potluck, just have a special event, for Tim. Because that we wanted Tim to be the focus.
Right. So it wouldn't be a regular book club if we do it that way. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get back.
And
to
he
you
is
then.
peer reviewed. Just like Gary Habermas.
It's an
Come
inside
on.
joke for those who don't know, so you have to explain the jokes a little bit.
He knows some things.
Gary, I think in this interview I'm about to show you, I think it's the way he talks about this published of this dialogue, My Pilgrimage from Atheism to Theism, a discussion between Anthony Flew and Gary Habermas. You will see a link to that. You can download it off my website if you want to read it. And I've got about 4 or 5 copies here that I'll pass around if anyone wants to take one. So let's just kick off this last section by watching that second video.
I think Dr. Flew may have kind of pioneered this idea of that atheism is the base position or the starting point of brute fact, so to speak, and so that's the starting point, and it's up to the theist to try to generate overwhelming evidence in order to counter that. I've listened to some of his lectures on that, where he talked about because the universe is eternal. Our universe is infinite, and with chance and time, we have everything we need to be able to explain what we see. However, as science progressed, the idea of the universe being infinite or eternal kind of went away, and I wonder if that may have played a role in his changing his position about the possibility of God.
Yeah, I think that was largely put forward, wasn't it, in his book, The Presumption of Atheism?
Yes.
Where you move the other direction. And boy, I'll tell you, if that's the position somebody wants to argue, I find that to be a highly problematic position. First thing that comes to my mind is, how can you define your position where I give all the evidence and you're not required to say a thing? You just kind of sit there as if you hold this naturalistic trumping position and you ask for evidence for everything. I just reviewed a book that does this, a naturalistic book, and the fellow goes, he says, don't give me any beliefs, just tell me the reasons. But then his position from which he critiques you is reasonless. But obviously when we walked down that hallway and he said to me, I have no evidence for my position, in spite of what he said in The Presumption of Atheism, it bothered him that he didn't have a positive case. And I think one of the best things about Christianity is, yes, anybody can do negative apologetics. Anybody can critique another position from theirs. But how many religions or how many philosophies actually have, let's say, 5 or 10 reasons how we know they're true? Now, Christianity certainly has that. I tell my PhD students, we have an embarrassing amount of evidence. We have more evidence than we need. And by that I mean several independent, non-overlapping arguments which are empirically true. I'm going to use the highest word, I think, empirical, to say it's true. But how many others can do that? I just finished an article before we started this interview. I just finished an article for a journal that said, I can't think of a religion in the world that even, quote, plays that game. I can't think of another religion, including Judaism, a belief system very close to Christianity. I don't hear Jewish scholars going around saying, here's 5 reasons you should be a Jew.
Yeah, maybe we should point out at this time junction. I know all of our club knows this already, but Anthony Flew never actually came to the position of Christianity. Could you tell us kind of where he ended up and maybe your discussions about that? Once he had said that he believed there was a God of some type.
Right. After that debate that you're referring to, the one that was on it was televised only. It wasn't done at a school. The other 2 were done at universities. That one was a made-for-television debate. And after it was over, a few months later, I got a long, detailed letter from him. It was on the British, oversized paper. It was handwritten like everything he did. And it was about 6 or 7 pages long. And it was so outstanding that a fellow professor was standing there next to me, and I said, "Look at this." And right away he looked at it and he said, "It sounds like this man is ready to become a Christian." I mean, he went through some of my arguments that came up, and he said, "This is Tony Flew." He said, "Let me tell you the argument for the resurrection that impresses me the most." I'm thinking, wow, why would he volunteer that? And then he starts talking about morality and how there's evidence for morality. And then we talked a little bit about near-death experiences, and he didn't believe in an afterlife. And he said, "Yeah, this makes me wonder about this." And he was going down the line, and he was basically conceding some of the best points for Christianity. And I said to my colleague, I said, "This sounds like he's about ready to become a Christian." Now, this would have been about 2002. And a short time after that, somebody told me that Tony Flew had become a theist. And so I called him on the phone. And he said, "Yes, I've become a theist." And we talked for a few minutes. And he said, "Hey, can you call me back in a couple of weeks because I'm working on a deadline right now?" And I said, "Sure." And 2 weeks later, I called him back and he said, "No, I've thought about it and I'm not a theist." So the first call he was. The second one, he said, "No, I'm not a theist." I said, "Well, you were a theist 2 weeks ago." He said, "I know, I'm not a theist now." And I said, "What are you then?" And I'll always remember this phrase, James. He said, "I'm not a theist, but I'm an atheist with big questions." That's what he said. "I'm an atheist with big questions." Then a year later, I heard that he was going through this yes-no again. I called him on the phone again, and he said, "I've become a theist, and I'm sticking with it. I really am." So he and I worked on an interview, which came to be called "My Pilgrimage from Atheism to Theism." We worked on it for about a year, and it was finally published. I think the actual date on the journal was 2004, and it was published in Philosophia Christi, the journal of the Evangelical Philosophical Society. And he mapped out what happened. One question, some people say, they asked me, did I use the word theist or did he use the word theist in the article? Because it was "My Pilgrimage from Atheism to Theism" by Tony Flew and Gary Habermas. Well, actually, Tony said, "Let's use the word theist," because I don't think a lot of people know what the word deism means. So I'll just use the word theist. Later, when he was convinced that people did know what deism meant, he switched to deism. But for that first interview, he was the one who said, "Let's use the word theism." So that's how it was published.
Let me ask you then, in your conversations after that, and you can tell from the book, especially the ending, he seemed like he was still very open to this idea that Christianity had the best arguments going for it. Not that he believed it. Did he, do you think, ever actually become a Christian?
All I can tell you is from myself and from some others with whom he was talking, he had heard the gospel. Now, whether he could pass an exam on it's another matter, but he had heard the gospel. And one time, I'll tell you about an actual conversation. One time we were talking, and when I would call him, we wouldn't just call and me pester him about Christianity. I mean, we might talk about Margaret Thatcher and politics, and did he think American missiles should be in England, and some of the similar things going on in the news yet today. And he was conservative, and he supported Margaret Thatcher and conservative in his politics. And so I said to him, "Hey, where are you in your reading, your spiritual pilgrimage?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I really can't become a Christian because of the problem of evil." And I said, "What bothers you the most about the problem of evil?" And he said, "The notion of hell. The notion of hell." He said that something like that God would, in a sense, turn his victims over on a spit, over a fire too. And I said, "Tony," I said, you're more affected by Dante here than you are by the New Testament. And he said, yeah, but it's hard to get that out of my mind. And so I recommended the Zondervan book. Now, they've come out with a new edition of it now, but I recommended the Zondervan book to him called Four Views on Hell. And I said, Tony, Christianity, evangelicals are not a monolithic group on what this has to be. And I literally said to him, James, I kind of surprised myself, but I literally said to him, Tony, I wouldn't want you to go to hell because you're dying for a single definition of hell when other positions are possible on the biblical data. And his response was so amazing. He said, I know it, like that, like he didn't want to be wrong, yeah. And this was probably 06, 07. And so all I can tell you is he knew the gospel. But then when he died, finally, we hadn't talked for a few months when he passed away. And all I can say to your question is, he knew the gospel. Whether he came to grips with the Lord in, let's call them, the still small hours of the morning, whether he did something in his last few months alone with the Lord, I can never say. But as far as I know, he never became a Christian.
Fantastic interview, James. I think that's one of your best ones.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought. What do you guys think?
Well, I only see one other one, so I only got to pick one out of them.
No, but I mean, he got stuff out of him that no.
Yeah,
who knows?
Oh, I thought he was pretty good.
I hadn't come across that. I didn't know that he went back and forth on that issue, and the whole thing about hell, that there was I didn't know what was deism as a whole was very, very popular in the 1700s. We were talking about that with Kevin. Kevin and I were talking about that. But for some reason, it just completely fell out of favor. And I thought, is it not a consistent worldview or something like that? Because it seems like, why can't you just be a deist? But hardly anybody is. And that's why Anthony Flew said, I don't think anybody knows what it is anymore. But that's what he ended up being. But it's this idea of the problem of evil. How could a loving God, all-powerful and loving, either doesn't have the power to stop evil, or he actually is evil, and that's why he permits it. And especially the biggest thing of that, and he's not alone in that, is this idea of hell. So I thought it was interesting. And did everybody understand what he meant about the Zondervan book, the different views of hell? And so it's not, Dante's Inferno is not the only evangelical understanding of what hell is, and there's other positions, and you can be wrong about hell. In fact, you probably are if there's so many different views of it. Everybody doesn't hold the same view, and still be a Christian. So I think what he was saying is don't reject Christianity just because you don't like one particular possible definition of what hell is like.
Is Lewis's book The Great Divide, The Great Divorce? What is it? The exact title of C.S. Lewis, Great Divorce, yeah.
Is that where Lewis says that the gates of hell are locked, but perhaps they're locked from the inside?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very symbolic. It's not like literal or whatever. But yeah, the people in hell is just a really nasty place where everything's run badly and nobody cooperates. And when you try to go to heaven, the light's so bright it hurts your eyes, and the grass hurts your feet because they're just not in a state ready, to be with God. But they're not forbidden,
That's not hell, that's Washington, D.C.
It actually has been compared to that.
It's just slow on my.
But it's a really interesting perspective that God is not putting there. They're just not ready to be in His presence, So.
I don't. Is it all right? I chime in.
Yeah.
Sure.
The idea of hell, and I don't know if we want to stick on this topic or not, but looking at the idea of hell, it seems really hard for me to believe that somebody doesn't believe it. Just when you look at the world, right? When you look at humanity and just the evil that exists, and how we're all just capable of doing some of the most, evil things, right? I don't know how anybody doesn't think there is hell. I mean, it seems to make sense considering the amount of evil that humans can do.
Well, I think
But
that
I agree with you, but the question is, would God be that way? If a loving God, could He figure out some kind of way that the punishment? And we could get into the whole thing. We're just not really addressing that issue. But there's a appeal to an idea that couldn't God just give you a fine or something. You know, so it's like, couldn't he just, or maybe, okay, you go ahead and serve 20 years, but then you're out or something like that.
Yeah, they do that in
Purgatory. They had that for a while.
Yeah, the evangelicals ruined that good thing.
Yeah, because I could be wrong in this, but I think in Islam they have that philosophy, that mentality.
Well, in Islam, you have the concept that unless you've committed shirk, which is the unpardonable sin, that if you're Muslim, so that you've given the declaration and you're Muslim, that every Muslim will eventually get out of hell. And I've had a number of Muslims say, well, see, I'm not worried because eventually I might go to hell, but eventually I get out. And of course, the problem is, where's that in the Quran? It's not in the Quran. And so it's by tradition, hadith, and other places that they're cobbling this together.
How many years is it for unbelief?
Well, you and I are both in the same boat. We ought to look into it because
no, the Mormons actually, the argument goes this with the Jews and Islam, the Christians. They'll still get to heaven. They might be in purgatory a little longer than a Muslim would, but not.
Yeah, the people of the book. The real question, though, for the Muslim, I know we're digressing, chasing rabbits here, but that shirk and pardonable sin is ascribing God, the attributes of God to any other being, which would include Jesus. So in a sense, we're in more trouble as Christians than an atheist is in that regard.
Yeah, it depends on, because I talk to Muslims at work, and sometimes we exchange ideas.
Yeah.
And they give me
interesting.
They give me the same apologetics, and ironically enough, like I was 20 years older.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, I can hear something new, and it's like, no, it's the same stuff.
Yes, we borrow from each other. The Kalam argument was originally put forth by a Muslim.
Yeah.
But by the way, I know we have new people, and raise your hand if you're new. One more time for me, okay? I want to make sure everybody that's new has a chance. Not that you have to talk. Although Bill will make you feel that way sometimes. You don't have to say anything.
He might call on you.
Exactly.
But we don't want you to be here and think, hey, it was interesting, but I sure wish I could have got it worded edgewise. I know I talk too much. So if you're new, you raised your hand a second ago, and you'd like to either ask a question or make a comment.
We have Tim, who is he just joined. He heard us on Justin Briley.
Yes.
And he is a former Wycliffe. You say it, Tim.
I'm Ken.
Ken, yeah.
Tim, but anyway, so yeah, I grew up as an MK missionary kid in Africa, born in Ethiopia. My parents were missionaries until I was 16. So left Africa when I was 16, but then I later became a missionary myself. Married evangelical believer. Joined Wycliffe Bible Translators, and our goal was to go to Africa in the country of Niger, in the Sahara Desert, and translate the Bible into an indigenous language there. About 500,000 people. So we were learning the language, and we were putting the language into writing. We created an alphabet and such. And probably about 3 years into the process, I started having doubts about the faith while reading the Bible. The Old Testament had a lot of things in it that didn't sit well with me, and at least I perceived a number of contradictions, and so I finally said, to the mission board, I can't continue, and left. And so I've been back here in Dallas ever since. That was 2000 that we left.
Which mission board was it?
Wycliffe Bible Translators.
Okay, yes.
It's an interdenominational mission board. So my wife is still a believer, and she goes to church. I go to church with her every once a month, maybe. But I enjoy getting together with believers, and I listen to Unbelievable quite a bit, and that's where I heard about the.
This is the third person that heard about this Arlington thing from Justin Briley out of London. So they live here, but they don't hear it from here. They hear it from London. That's interesting.
I think if you marketed yourselves a little bit better.
I know. We're working on it. We're on the trailing edge of technology.
Can I ask what the biggest perceived contradiction for you was?
Well, one of the things that troubled me, I guess, the most was, I don't know how much detail I want to get into, but, everybody has, from time to time, questions about the slaughter of the Canaanites. But in particular, one story that really bothered me was where Moses, at God's command, told the Israelite soldiers to take the girls, the virgins for themselves, and just kill everybody else. Kill the men, the women, the children, but keep the virgins for themselves, and that was the breaking point for me.
But wasn't it also like cumulative? Like it was just
Oh,
that
yeah,
one.
yeah,
you
that was just
start
one.
adding
That
them
was
all.
just one of many.
Right, right. Yeah. Now, one thing that I was concerned about Ken, so I'm going to check this, because if he's Wycliffe, does he know his Greek and Hebrew? Because we Christians like to be able to say, well, in the original Greek, that's not even a problem. So I didn't want any atheists to be able to call us on that.
Well, I think was it Mark Twain? It's not the things I don't understand about the Bible; it's the things that I do understand about it.
I think all of us are in that boat with you on that, and with Mark Twain.
Welcome.
Yeah, great. Any other new people that want to either make a comment?
I will say one other thing, that I was a deist for at least a year on my way out. I'm a weak atheist now, but
Okay.
I was a deist for at least a year, so I sympathize with what Anthony Flew was going through. I couldn't conceive of how there couldn't be a God, but yet I couldn't accept the Bible as being God's revelation either.
So maybe it's oftentimes a stopping point, either going in or coming out.
Yeah,
Maybe.
and C.S. Lewis did the same on the way into
Yeah.
Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so.
So you need to write a book so we can read it 1 month.
Yeah.
The opposite.
We'd be able to be able to interview the author.
Yeah.
So any other people, your first time, and you want to either make a comment or ask a question?
Call them out.
No. So, Bill, did you want to share anything about what do you think of the interview?
Oh, well, you mean your
Content, yeah.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've got another short one. I think 6 minute. The last one's 6 minutes. If we can roll on that and then finish up some talk if you want to. Does that sound good?
Now, do the people here know this gentleman personally that we're interviewing?
Gary Habermas?
Yeah.
He's peer reviewed. That's all you got to know. No, he's like the go-to guy on the resurrection of Jesus
I was
Christ.
just curious if
I know him
anybody here knew him other than...
I've known him about 10 years, but only because we speak at the same conference almost every year in New Orleans, and I appreciate him taking time to do this for the book club, and I'd love sometime in the future if he could even meet us in person and talk with us. You want to watch that other
Sure.
the final pledge now? Well, for the sake of our interview right now, could you just, like in very short, succinctly, tell us what the gospel is?
Myself? Well, the way I present it is this way. There's two sides. There's the human side and there's God's side. Now, obviously, it should be the other way around. God's side, human side. On God's side, my opinion is there are certain data which are indispensable, and then the person gets involved with regard to whether they're going to believe or not. It'd be like, to me, my best illustration is to say two people might date for years, and one of them might get to know the other one better than anybody in the universe. They know that person better than the person's parents do. But if you don't say I do, you're not married. It's that simple. You could be best friends. You could know each other better than anything. You don't say I do, you're not married. Well, whenever the New Testament defines the gospel, and this is primarily in the writings of Paul and in the book of Acts, these three truths are always present. The deity of Christ, the death, resurrection. Deity, death, resurrection. Evangelicals often say death, burial, resurrection. And actually, burial is mentioned a lot, but it's not mentioned all the time. Deity is, death is, for sure, resurrection is, for sure. And to me, that's God's side. God asks us, are we willing to believe in the person of his Son? Romans 10:9 may be my favorite verse that states this. If we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God's raised him from the dead, we'll be saved. Now, in that text, we have deity, resurrection, death. That's the order it comes in that text. And by the way, that's a pre-Pauline text. That predates Paul. So we have every reason to think that when Paul said yes to Jesus on the way to Damascus, that saying was already in existence. And Paul later wrote it down. Okay, that's God's side. And just like we have to make decisions, those of us who are married, or those of us who are not, we had to make decisions whether we wanted to be or did not want to be married. Well, I look at it that the human side is are we going to enter this relationship with Jesus? Of course, there's different Christian views on, will God choose everybody and will he make them come to repentance, or are they free? That's another discussion. But however it appears, there's God's side of truth and our side of belief and involvement. And that's how I see it. God's evidence, God's data. Do we want to agree? Do we want to believe, yes or no?
Thanks so much, Gary. And it's a final request on your time this afternoon. This Atheist Christian Book Club, we've been going almost a year now on it. And do you have a word of greeting or advice about half atheists, half Christians? It can get tense at times, but always respectful. You have a word of advice or encouragement for us?
Actually, I do. For the atheist friends who attend your meeting, I was challenged early 90s that when I go to state universities, not to just walk away and leave this group of people to the local Christian club, whoever it was, but to actually get involved with some of the seekers who were unbelievers and would ask me to talk to them about doubt. So I started doing that. I was challenged by this. And ever since that time, I have befriended and walked in the shoes of probably 20 or 30 atheists, agnostics, and we have talked. We've had the most amicable relationship, probably just like I would have with a Christian. And the one message I would say to them, the unbelievers, is if the resurrection of Jesus is true, Christianity is true. And the reason that's important is because the evidence for the resurrection is so outstanding that a skeptic like Dale Allison at Princeton Seminary, Dale is liked by the atheists and agnostics that I know, because they like his really creative natural theories he comes up with. And yet he says in his book on the resurrection, he calls himself a deist. And yet he says, I have no doubt that after his death, Jesus appeared to his disciples. Now, why would a skeptic concede that? To me, that's how strong the evidence is. And I think the thought I would want to leave with the unbelieving friends that come to your meeting is what I call the minimal facts argument. Tony and I discussed it all the time. If we can take only the facts which are agreed to by scholars across the board, I use a half dozen of them, only those facts are sufficient to show that the resurrection is the best answer to the data we have. And when the critics come back, like they always do, with where there's so many errors in the New Testament, or there's contradictions here, I will often ignore those questions. And I will say, I'm not going to discuss the contradictions right now because they're not relevant to what I just said. What I said was I can take the facts we agree on, not the facts we don't agree on. I can take the facts we agree on, and I think I can get to resurrection. I think it's that kind of an argument that has stimulated some discussion today because it's facts shared in common by believers and unbelievers alike. I say they should push us to a resurrection. If they say not, I'd like to know how they get out of it.
Well, Gary,
I don't see a way out.
Well, Gary, would you be willing to maybe come back at some future time and discuss that with us?
Absolutely. Be glad to do it.
Thanks so much. My guest again, Gary Habermas, distinguished professor of philosophy and apologetics at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. Gary, thanks so much for giving us your time and this afternoon, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, James. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
So, what did you guys think of the appendix? That was his view on N.T. Wright's account of the resurrection, or evidence for the resurrection, right?
Well,
Appendix B. Appendix B.
Yeah.
Let me say, first of all, 20% of the book were the appendices, so you could have read just that, been through that much faster. But you need to understand when he does the N.T. Wright on the resurrection, he doesn't say he believes that. He included it because he felt it was the best argument for it, not that he had come across, not that he bought into it. And I think Gary fairly represented it. Nobody has any evidence that he ever became a Christian. So he doesn't agree with our position.
But he concedes that me and Terry were talking about. Have you guys seen the movie My Cousin Vinny?
Yeah.
When their lawyer goes and, okay, it's your turn, and he goes, boy, he's good. It's like, man. And he goes, what? And it's like, Flew goes, boy, that's impressive. I've never heard in a debate the other side go, man, you're great.
Well, there was the debate at Bible and Beer where it's actually conceded. Who was it that
Miracles
conceded the
are
debate at the end? Huh?
That miracles are possible.
That miracles are possible.
Tim
Was that Zach?
Yeah,
Yes.
Zach and Tim.
Yeah, wait a minute, you lost the debate before you even began.
Who's Zach Moore?
Zach
Yeah.
Moore conceded the debate at the end publicly.
But it was just pitiful. I mean, who would concede all that? I kept saying, and Gary Habermas is an expert in this stuff, so he just bulldozed over Flew, and it was like, oh, the data says this. Data? This isn't data. This is hearsay 40 years out. This is people that see demons behind every tree. You don't have historical facts here. This is just hearsay.
Paul isn't 40 years out. We've talked about
Well,
that.
true.
And
4 years out.
And there's quite a bit of data.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to
Just
say, I
playing.
had a question, because how long from the time of that debate till his death was there Andrew Flew?
The first debate was in the 90s. The one that we watched was early 2000s, I think.
Because he reminded me of someone who had dementia during that debate.
Well, some of the atheists,
That's what.
wasn't that right?
That was an
Well,
argument.
that was
from
the argument
atheist,
of
and he came out and said, "No, like this is
Well,
what I believe."
what
I don't
happened
think that's
was-
a
Yeah, I don't
wrong
think-
position.
Yeah, there were
He
people
might have-
that thought that he didn't even write the book.
Yeah.
If you want, Wikipedia has a good article on that. If you want to go look at that, it was Richard Dawkins was the one who backhandedly.
Richard Carrier, I think it was.
Well, Carrier also, Dawkins I think as well.
Oh yeah, I guess both were involved.
Yeah.
Carrier was a big.
Richard Carrier would have never let him get away with those minimal facts. The empty tomb is not a minimal fact. There's
But-
Bart
but
Ehrman
he's-
says
but
there's
he's-
no empty tomb.
Well, I will say this: the minimal facts he was talking about was what most scholars, including atheists and Christians, agree on.
Yeah.
But you make the exception. Richard Carrier is not most scholars. You can't include Muslim scholars because they don't agree with the secular or the Christian historians, and you can't include the mythicists. So Richard Carrier couldn't be in the group.
Yeah.
But if you believe there was a really of Jesus, they're not saying the facts we don't agree on. So we're not saying. I mean, I think everybody would agree Jesus is dead, died, right? Would we all agree that Jesus isn't died at some point,
You gotta
right?
start with that he
Was he crucified? Almost everybody's going to say yes. Did his disciples claim to have seen something? We're not saying they did. I mean, there's other possible explanations, but was there a claim by followers, Paul and others, that he resurrected? And so you start with the things that we agree on, which is a good way of doing, I think, any kind of historical research. Let's just start with what we agree on and think about the possibilities. Okay, it could be that it was a conspiracy. It could be that it was hallucination. It could be, there's a lot of possible explanations.
Flu's position was that and this is by Gerd Ludemann too, that the disciples had this enormous grief when Jesus died, so they thought they saw appearances. And that's right, a lot of scholars believe that the Christians at least thought they saw.
Right, but that's all we're saying.
Precisely,
We just start with, can we agree that they thought they saw something? That's all we're saying. What can we all agree on and start with something that we can have
The problem in the
consensus.
debate was he would say, I think it was a hallucination by Paul or whatever, and then Habermas would just obliterate him on why it's so problematic with mass.
The force of the minimal facts is, once you agree to those minimal facts, you don't want to provide a positive alternative because you can be decimated when you do. And so what you want to say is, we have no idea, and I wouldn't even want to guess out loud because I know you're going to tear me apart if I do. And so if you say hallucination, you have the whole problem with, you had that many people having a mass hallucination that was identical. And so there's a swoon theory as well. There's all the alternatives, popular alternatives at least, seem improbable.
I've always wanted to know, he throws out there that most scholars, believing and unbelieving, accept these 4 minimal facts, but I'd like to see some actual percentages. I mean, is he talking about 100%, 90, 70, you know, how much, and what percentage of those are Christians or you know, because most people in New Testament studies or scholars are some form of Christian or another. They might be liberal or not. But
Bart Ehrman, how would you? He was Christian background, but I don't think anybody would say he's Christian.
Right, no, he's agnostic or atheist.
Right.
Now he would, and John Dominic Cross, and both him and Bart Ehrman would say that Jesus crucified is a minimal fact because it's the last thing.
Crossan, though, is a Christian of sorts because he. Tell us what Crossan is.
In the name.
Cross in his name.
Yep.
John is a Christian.
Describe where he is coming from philosophically.
Oh, well, he believes Jesus was thrown, the common practice was to just throw a crucified someone.
But I mean, his Christianity, because he is technically a Christian.
Well, when you believe he was just thrown to the side of the road and eaten by dogs a few days later. Just like you, Terry. Tell the story of when they asked if you were a Christian or whatever. No, you said, could I be a Christian and not believe?
Yeah, I guess I was probably about 15, and we were raised Baptist and Episcopal.
Well, there's your bad start right there.
My father was Baptist. My
You're
mother
Christian
was-
schizophrenic.
Unholy marriage.
And I guess I was about 15, and I went to Father Kennedy at St. Mark's, and I said, I have a problem. I said, I left the church, and I'm just wondering, can I still be a Christian if I don't believe that Jesus story? I don't believe the whole resurrection story. And he said no, and I was like, well, I really like the incense, you know, and I love getting dressed up. So are you sure? And he was like, pretty much, yeah, we're sure.
Yeah.
Because the whole story, I mean, even at 15, the whole story just sounded
Incredulous.
Ridiculous.
Yes, I mean, it was kind of like, oh yeah, I figured out there wasn't a Santa Claus, and now here we go again.
Well,
But
you know,
it-
go ahead.
But that's just, I mean, that's just how as a young girl, that's kind of just how my mind.
Well, okay, based
wrapped around
on
that.
what you said, and John Dominic Crossan, I think, would be in the same kind of position you were. So he doesn't believe in a resurrection.
Right, he doesn't
But
believe in the
he's
miracles.
technically a Christian as far as he holds an office as a Christian.
But see, what Christians can't get is there's historical elements. Jesus being crucified, Jesus being baptized by
Love
the
the songs. Love the songs.
But there's quasi-historical stuff, and then there's pure fiction, and they just can't get. But what you were going to say, something, Ken?
They think it's all legit, and in reality, it might be partly true, partly
Right,
false.
right, exactly.
That's
Yeah.
not the
I'm sorry.
No.
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I think each of these facts comes with a degree of probability. Maybe, you know, we're 95% sure that the disciples saw Jesus or thought they saw Jesus. We're 95% sure that it was empty, or we're 90%, you know, whatever percentage. It's never 100%, right? So these are things that are broadly accepted. Some are more accepted than others, like Ehrman doesn't believe in the empty tomb, for example. But you know, the other day I lost my wallet, I misplaced my wallet. I couldn't find it. I searched the house for half an hour. I was about ready to leave, you know, to go to Houston, and I needed my wallet, and I searched the car. I searched the house all over the place, and I went to every last place I could think of that I could remember where I had been. Couldn't find it. But never once did it occur to me that maybe it just miraculously disappeared. That would have been the last thing I would ever have conceived or imagined. You know, somebody could have said to me, "Well, Ken, you were here. It's not there. It must have disappeared."
It must have
Yeah,
been
Could have been aliens.
yeah. So, but you know, I guess my point is that, yeah, all of these things together look like they point to a resurrection, but it's the last thing we should think of.
Well, and I think,
And that's David Hume's
That's
argument, which this guy Flew is an expert on.
that's a compelling. That's a compelling.
Well,
point.
one of my issues always been too with the resurrection. It's like, okay, then, and I realize that Christians are going to think it's because it was God, and right, but then where did the body? You know, the argument goes, where did the body go, right? And I get that to Christians it's going to be a supernatural explanation, but for me that's not good enough. I'm like, okay, it got to be something. Like he was saying with the wallet thing. To me, it's not. Oh, I lost my wallet. Oh, it must be the spirits took it away.
And that's what David Hume said 200 years ago. It's the least likely explanation. Yeah. Any explanation, it was grave robbers. you got it in a temporary tomb, and then the people were killed, and it went.
Or
they
the
never
Romans came back and took
Any
it.
explanation is better than the supernatural explanation.
But Bill,
Yeah.
what was David Hume's argument? Like, why was that the last explanation?
Because in our world, you don't see dead people rising from the dead. You don't see
Yeah.
people walking on the water.
and
It
and
could be
then he
argued
said
both directions. Go ahead.
because, well, what about the people who did see him? Right? Because we do have claims that people did see
Right.
him resurrect. And his point was, well, we don't have anybody who's reliable who reports miracles. So he talks about how we know miracles don't happen, and we know they don't happen because we don't have anybody that's reliable that reports them. And then we say, well, what about the reliable people that we do have? He says, oh, well, they're not reliable. And you say, well, why are they not reliable? And he says, because they reported a miracle. And he just does this. It's circular reasoning. His whole
You have a
argument
little bit of that,
ends
you know,
up
it's
being
just like-
circular reasoning.
It's not circular reasoning because in my mind I'm thinking, like if I went to the bank and stole the money and I'm walking out with the bags of money, they go, hey, Hula, what you doing? And the cops arrest me. I'll be like, oh no, this is like God told me to take this money and take it home. And they're not gonna believe me. They're gonna just think I'm robbing a place. Like,
But that's not the point. The point is, like, I'm talking specifically of David Hume, since we keep using him. His argument specifically is that.
Well, I think Kim brought up a good point, and the question, and this was brought up when we did the Ehrman-Craig debate with the minimal facts approach. At what point, like the supernatural explanation is an argument from excluding all other natural explanations.
Yeah.
And at what point have you decided that you've ruled out the natural explanations? And I don't see in the minimal facts approach where you rule out where you've exhausted all possibilities, even if they seem kind of unlikely.
I think you're right, and I think Ken mentioned too. You at some point you're dealing with probabilities.
You are,
and so maybe if you make one of the natural possible natural explanations so improbable when you think about it that it diminishes the likelihood of that one. But yeah, you're right. You never get to zero on it. I don't think, would you? It's always possible that that's what happened.
You see, and what Habermas is brilliant
the natural
is
explanation.
he sets up these minimum facts. Then he goes and says, "Oh, swim theory. That's how put it in the wrong tomb. That doesn't make sense." And then he knocks down those straw men. And then it's like, well, obviously it's because Jesus actually did rise from the dead. William Lane Craig does the same thing where he says it's the best explanation. It has huge explanatory. Yeah.
But that always sounds to me like, okay, I don't know what happened to the body, so I mean, you don't have anything with high probability for it to happen, so we're just going to say magic did it.
Well, he says this is the resurrection's the best explanation. Here's the problem: you're offering us.
That's just your people's stuff. That's saying, hey, this is what happened.
But he's saying the problem is it's a supernatural.
That's what I'm saying.
No,
when you say supernatural, I'm hearing.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yes. Magically, I did this.
So, I guess the one thing I want to be weary of here is not to discount history. Okay, and I say this, history was my thing. Right? And so when I did my thesis, it was on Hitler's ethic. And when you look back in history, and we look at all the historical stories, whether it's Christianity, Islam, whatever, there's consensus among documents written, whether it was at the time or 40, 50 years later, that were seen by multiple people. And we agree when we see that that's history, and we conclude it's historical fact. Because, as you know, we don't know medieval times looked and acted the way it really did. None of us were there. So we can make the claim, well, how do you know knights existed? Right?
Engravings in the stones, you can find documentation.
Yeah,
you can find
yes, but all of that,
You said that about Jesus.
Did those people do it at the time? Did they do it 100 years later? Was it just a story they were making up?
Well, they can
So
carbon
I
date
think there's an
things.
intellectual honesty that you have to have. And if you accept history of any kind, okay, you have to apply the same argument to religion.
Let me ask
Just
this way
in the
for the
historical
atheist,
accuracy.
see if I can tie into what you're saying, and I'm understanding it correctly, and then kind of ask the question of our atheist friends. If you had this same kind of data, Paul writing about the events in Corinthians within 6 years of the alleged event of the resurrection, and you have the other things, the gospel writers 30, 40 years later, let's say, if there was no supernatural, if they were just reporting a battle that took place, it was no supernatural thing. We see battles happen all the time. Would it be considered probably reliable as anything else we have in ancient history? Of course, it doesn't prove it happened or didn't happen. Is the real problem it's reporting supernatural events is what makes it so hard to
No, here's the problem you have
For me-
is when we know Caesar crossed the Rubicon most likely because we have hostile witnesses. The problem with the Gospels is these are highly biased. They say they're writing the Gospel to convert people. It's like reading a biography of R.L. Hubbard written by a Scientologist.
So Thales, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Emperor Trajan, those guys were like friends of Christians.
Well, they're not talking about the resurrection. They were talking about Christians.
They're talking about
They talk about the resurrection.
And no, Tacitus because
just wrote on it.
But they were
Tacitus is a hostile witness when he says this superstition. It's hard
Show me
to
where they
think.
talk about the resurrection. Sorry.
Which started in Judea, now broke up out in Rome. It's a Christianity, or the world's largest religion, where all the nutcases come. So yeah, we take that, and Josephus we take as a credible witness.
Objection, nutcases. Strike that from the record.
No, but, well, I'm just, he didn't say that, obviously.
Present nutcases. You're talking about the other.
I had a question.
I'm just using a little color to get the point
What do you
across.
think the most naturalistic, the best naturalistic explanation to it would be?
to the four minimal
Temporary
facts.
tomb. They put them in a temporary tomb, and
Can you
they
go
just
further
got the
with that?
wrong.
Just kind of explain that.
Okay.
For the four minimal facts.
Yeah, well,
To
like
knock
the
down
empty
each
tomb.
one.
Would the empty tomb be one of the four?
That's one of the four.
Yeah, yeah.
And but they stack on each other. Like they don't stack on each other like a table with legs. So you have to knock them all.
And by the way, John Dominic Crossan does agree, so would Bart Ehrman, that his baptism by John in the Jordan River, there's an actual Jordan River, John was an apocalyptic figure, everything makes sense on that. Jesus being crucified, you'd never expect your Messiah to die of crucifixion and ignominious death. I mean, that just totally went against what they believed he would be, which was a priestly savior or a military conqueror. So yeah, but when you get to the empty tomb, now you got a lot of, because Bart Ehrman looked at every early Christian document, and they always just threw the body to the side of the road. There was never a proper burial for it. So, especially someone that, and why did he get crucified? King of the Jews. He was tried for sedition against the state. They would have never had a proper burial. And Joseph of Arimathea means disciple of, so that is just a Christian invention, obviously.
So where do you think the body went at that point?
Who knows? I mean, like Barnum said, they could have went and tried to bury the body. They got, killed by someone, and the body was beyond recognition a few days later, and who knows what
Yeah,
happened.
but here's where Ehrman screwed up, though. When he got to the sightings of Jesus, he called it hallucination, and his evidence was, look at these incidents where 50,000 people saw the Virgin Mary. Well, he's just proving that, God reveals stuff and people see it. I mean, he's destroying his own argument there. He doesn't really explain the
Well, the
sightings.
hallucination theory is problematic. And then the women, discovering the tomb is a good evidence that.
What's the natural explanation?
What makes that a good evidence? You might want to remind
Oh,
me.
because women's testimony, with good reason, was pretty much
With
worthless.
good reason.
Even today, they did.
That's Bill Clock, everybody.
That's the atheist side that says that. No, okay,
Don't blame the
But actually, and see again, Gary Habermas, this is the debate. Women sometimes could testify and were, used as witnesses.
We need to start wrapping up. So there's a couple of real quick things. I wanted to see if I could get Kevin to give us some final words of insight, maybe.
Yeah, I think, the book for me is a fascinating book, but it's the personal side of it, and it goes back to a conversation we had here in this room about 4 months ago, in which Jim was asking, can you follow the evidence wherever it leads? And asked the question, so what would it take? What kind of evidence would it take for you to change your position? And we talked a little bit about that question. Well, interesting, this book is just that. It is the foremost atheist scholar for decades who says, here's the evidence for what it took me to move from being an atheist to being a deist or a theist. And so those first 65 pages, the ones I said you might want to skip, were really, him saying, look, this is my atheist bona fide. I really am the real deal. I'm not just a doddering old fool kind of guy. But even despite that, all of these issues were enough to move me out of that camp into the other. And so regardless of what he has in those pages that come after 65, the fact that he followed the evidence to actually move away from atheism,
He closes the book that way too.
Fascinating story.
Yeah, he closes the book that way too. It's going to be interesting to see where the evidence leads over the next few years, he said. But I didn't realize till I read the book and did the accompanying research that he's credited with the no true Scotsman fallacy.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And that also he pioneered this whole presumption of atheism. I've heard Matt Dillahunty take that approach. He's the one that basically invented that approach. It's and then Alvin Plantinga had tried to use it against him. That was kind of interesting thing. I didn't know that he used to be a Marxist who became a believer in free market. He gave that as an example of being willing to switch his position. And in answer to, I thought this was interesting, in answer to people who thought that he's becoming a Christian, realizing that death is imminent, as part of like Pascal's wager. Well, just in case I'm wrong, I'm going to switch positions. He said, he mentioned on page 269 that he wanted us to know that he still doesn't believe he's going to survive death. So this is no way trying to cash in on Pascal's wager or anything like that. So he didn't become a Christian, and I was kind of disappointed in that. But in a way, it almost strengthens his position for this discussion, because he's not fully in our camp either, and he left this world having real problems with Christianity. It's interesting that he did feel like the evidence brought him so far, but best we can tell is here he said he never went all the way into our camp as well. So he's one that he got away from both of us in a sense.
It strikes me as interesting that it depends on the direction of movement. If you're a deist, if you're coming in, then you're lauded by the Christian side. But if you're going from Christianity to deism, you're like the most vociferous opponents of Christianity in the 17th, 18th century were deists. Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson and so forth. They were like the atheists of their day. But now somebody becomes a deist, and yay, Christians! This is our savior.
It's close enough.
Horseshoes and hand grenades.
The
trend is your friend.
Exactly. It's the direction. It's the movement.
It was also fascinating that he got his chops, and his first real atheist encounter with Christianity, public debate style, was at Oxford with C.S. Lewis, who's one of our kind of folk heroes for Christian apologists, stuff like that. So he went up against one of our favorite sons, and apparently was more than able to hold his own. Some of the things that he produced out of that debate were being republished and reissued 40 years later. I mean, that's remarkable. You have to be kind of brilliant to have those kind of atheist arguments that are still looked at. So I enjoyed the book. I think
it's a great pick, yeah.
So that brings us to the question of what are we going to do? How can we top that one? So I think what we're going to do is look at Sam Harris, Free Will. How many are familiar with Free Will by Sam Harris?
It's a short book.
Have you read it? Have you read it?
It's a very short book, yeah.
Yeah, it's a short book. I love that. Fluke gets into this. Can matter think? And is consciousness an illusion? This whole idea of mind-brain dichotomy. So I've not been able to read it yet, although I've had some very interesting discussions. And just like Anthony Flew didn't totally agree on our side, I've had enough debates over there at Jay Gilligan's to know that atheists are not monolithic on this issue. So, but I think it's an interesting thing. I think Harris is brilliant, and he's a very engaging communicator. So, unless I get a new revelation from God and can convince Bill, we've decided this is kind of the way that we want to go. Any questions on? I think there's an audio book as well, but I'll get you the links to that. If you want to make a note, go ahead and start reading. It's a very short book, very interesting. Do we really have free will? Or is it just an illusion? Did you really decide to come here tonight? Or was it inevitable that you had to because of brain chemistry and DNA?
Did he want to write that book, for example?
Yes, and is it possible for him to change our mind, or is that also predetermined?
It's like the guy that wrote the book that you can't trust anything anybody writes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was gonna ask,
Truest book ever written.
I noticed earlier you guys were talking about moving the event from March 2nd to like the 3rd.
Well, we're going to be conflicted, aren't we, with the apologetics conference?
Yeah, but it probably wouldn't affect 80-90% of us here today.
Yeah.
I mean,
how many of you are planning to drive all the way to Allen for?
Everybody's welcome to go up
Okay.
Friday night. It also is all day Saturday, so you
Okay.
can go on Saturday and not go on Friday night.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
okay.
another-
And you get extra credit for the book club if you do that.
Like street cred or something? Like,
Street cred.
Yes.
oh, okay. Wow, you dedicated.
Is it a prize?
So and I'll get you the video, the little commercial. We had to change the date by one, but I'll get you the little commercial with Tim. Most of you remember Tim from last month's interviews, but that's going to be Friday, same time, same channel, right here. We'll do a dinner and everything, but it's going to be the third Friday, which is the 23rd of March. So I didn't want to really start promoting that until we got past this next book club.
So we may have two meetings that
Exactly.
month.
We may have 2 in March. Maybe we take April off or something.
It's up to you guys whether you want to skip the one on the 2nd. That's up to
Why are we skipping April again?
Oh, well, that's just a.
We can determine when we get there, but it puts us 2 meetings in the same time.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just was curious what the.
We have no life.
Horror.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
My other question is this, I left it earlier, like, the meeting, can I suggest books?
Yes, we're open to suggestions and.
Just put it on the
Yeah,
Facebook group or something?
yeah, put it on, everybody know about our Facebook page too, Atheist Christian Book Club, and there's Friends of Atheist, you post that. By the way, if you haven't read it yet, Chris put a really good article in there related to some of the things we've talked about. I've been wanting to make some comments on that. This is the kind of thing I like to see more of, thoughtful. I mean, you didn't do it just for that. I think it was part of your
It's part of my normal stuff. But
yeah,
it's
exactly.
sparked by the debate.
But I love to see that kind of input, and maybe it becomes a place that we can expand the discussion. And don't forget, every other Thursday, you need to get on that list for Britt to invite you to the interfaith dialogue that takes place at Hooligans.
May I ask why that's so early?
No, it's anytime you want to go.
It's 4 to 8.
I work for a living, and 4 o'clock.
Well, a lot of people come in from 7 to 8.
If you want to go to where the nutcases go at IHOP, you're welcome to that. 8:30 to 1.
Where's our other alumni from IHOP? Is she there?
Oh, you mean Sue? Yeah, she left.
No, not Sue. The other
Tracy.
one.
Tracy, yeah, she left at 7.
Yeah, she had to leave early. Yeah,
She had to
but
leave early. So.
She was.
My other thing was my interfaith thing with the Facebook.
Oh yeah, you were going to mention your interfaith.
Yeah, and Julio wants to tell us about something that sounds interesting that we might.
Well, it wasn't a big deal, but Tracy already left, but she was letting me know that there's like an interfaith group meet up at a. If you want to basically meet other people of different faith, I figured this group might be good for it. That's why I'm letting you guys know. I put the details on the Facebook page for this group.
Okay.
In the group discussion. But
have you been to it?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, Tracy told me because she was looking for secular humanists to go to this because apparently their argument was, we always bring all these other people. We bring the Muslims, we bring the Jews, but we never bring any atheists. so she's trying to. So Tracy was letting me know to help this group out.
Any token atheists, they need.
But yeah, but you guys obviously the Christian can show up. It's interfaith. It doesn't say just people. But I thought if you guys want to talk to other people besides atheists, or if you're yourself an atheist and you want to go to this, you can. It's in Colleyville. It's on February 11th. I think it's from 6 to 9, maybe, but I could be wrong about
What's
that.
the name of it?
I can get it out. I have to put my. phone.
And Bill, you count as 2 atheists, so if you want to go that way, balance it out a bit, right?
Sorry about that. I wasn't prepped on this, but yeah, it's called. It is on the Facebook page for the group, and that's why I keep trying to direct people there because apparently you might want to RSVP. Just make sure they have no seats.
That was fun.
If you guys want to go to it, that's fine. If not, it won't hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Before we break, I did want to also special thank you to Conrad who provided
Woohoo.
Thank you, Conrad. Great shall be your reward in heaven, if I'm right.
Well, there better be a heaven after I brought on that chicken.
Especially for the chickens.
Welcome to special welcome to our new members. I hope you feel at home. And again, in between, feel free to make comments or ask questions on the Facebook page. Thanks.
And the name of the group is called Peace Together.
Peace.
Yeah, I know. Build a relationship with, and then that's the name.
That was good.